Let me introduce our next speaker. He is from SoftServe, and he would be talking about how to win tenders, how to win when you are in tender from big company, as I understand your topic correctly.
Close enough.
Close enough. Okay, Brian, your turn.
Thank you. Where's everyone going? It's going to be fun. Come on back. I promise. We have exciting things to talk about.
Is this relevant for small and medium companies or big companies like SoftServe?
Small is good too?
Yep.
Yeah. Please stay. So thank you. Again, my name is Brian Borack. I work at SoftServe today. So I joined SoftServe about a year ago. Before that, I was a client of 5 Ukrainian companies for 6 years. Big ones and small ones. So today I'm talking about from a client perspective, what clients go through to pick the country they want to work with, and also a vendor they might want to work with. So I'm not speaking today from a SoftServe perspective, but I'm a client. So please also ask me questions you might want to ask of a client you may have asked or wanted to ask, and I'll put my client perspective on for you today. So I'll cover 3 things. Again, first, what I went through to choose a country to go to for outsourcing, what I learned from the process of many years, and also I'll tell a story along the way. So first, I worked at a company called BMC Software. Who here has heard of BMC Software? A few. So BMC Software is a very large company, more than $2 billion, global company. Almost every Fortune 1000 company uses a BMC product. We have lots of products. Now, I'm going to show you in a second. I spent last night about an hour coding just for today, and I'm not a coder. But I learned Visual Basic to put a video embedded into PowerPoint, which of course did not work. We're going to go old school and go up there and play on YouTube. So give me 1 second. And I might need help from. So I'll try to be fancy, but it didn't work out. Next time.
IT threads through everything we do. Share, touch, work, and discover. It's way more than just the heart of business. Today, IT is business. The very building block encoded in the DNA of every transformational company on the planet. A living, breathing, working foundation that helps focus, quicken, and evolve a company. But for IT to do these things, it needs to be these things. Introducing Living IT from BMC. This is IT that pulses with life, that feels less like technology and more like a natural extension of who we are and how we work. It is the natural selection of business. So we bring you IT that doesn't run from change. It runs on it. We're not just transforming individuals, CIOs, and companies. We're transforming lives. Because when adaptive software becomes hardwired into the fabric of our everyday, when it moves us forward by enabling greater adaptation, evolution, and speed, we do more than just bring technology to businesses. Now and forever, we bring IT to life.
So that's who BMC is today. They're known as a infrastructure software company building service desks or ways to monitor your servers, your databases. They've transformed to now all about digital IT. How to bring.
Thank you. Good morning, Orlando. Good morning.
It's okay. Next video. How to bring IT in people's lives. And I share that because a little known secret. Most of the products behind that new vision are actually being built in Ukraine. Now, no one knows that, but we started the journey about 5 years ago, and we actually launched this vision about 6 months ago. But again, we looked for a plan to go do this. It takes years of planning to go launch a whole new vision for a big company. And I helped start that plan years ago, and it's done here. So I'll go through how we did that and what's going on in Ukraine. But I want to give you the vision of exciting work that a billion-dollar company is betting their future on is being built, a lot of it's being built here. So who was BMC? So back in 2010, I worked at BMC. I was in charge of all global outsourcing. We had partners in South America, in Asia, in Europe, all around the world. We have about 3,000 to 4,000 engineers. And we have big teams in the US, in Boston, and Silicon Valley in California, teams in Israel, teams in the UK, and a very large team in India. And about 1,500 employees in India. And we actually forced most teams to go to India to save money over time. We looked at actually by product line, who was in India. Some product lines had 90% of their engineers in India, in one city, in one building. So our board said that's high risk. In case the flu hits India, we're done for weeks. Not alone political risk or financial risk. So they asked me to look into where else to go in the world to pick our next location for a large team. And the vision was up to 300 people within 3 years. Now I didn't know back then on the client side how difficult that would be. Now I know that from the vendor side, but I was a little naive. But I'll tell you the end of the story at the end of the slides today. So again, we had to go where? Now where do you go in the world with this kind of great talent? It wasn't, again, to do maintenance work. It was to help build the future vision for the company with very complex application development. So the first thing I did was I needed to create criteria to present to the board on where to go. So I looked at Gartner, Forrester, other research companies. I talked to my friends and family, talked to my companies I knew in the marketplace to begin the criteria creation of logically how to pick somewhere to go. So first, Gartner publishes a report by country for outsourcing. And here's their top 10 criteria they use to help companies pick where to go to for outsourcing. You know, this data is old, but the same criteria exists today. And they actually rank each country on how they map to this criteria. And a lot of it was very useful. And for me, the most important two were on the labor market. So I wanted to get a lot of great talent, but at the right cost. The other ones were important requirements, but those two back then for me were the most important requirements. But it wasn't enough. So I added more criteria that I thought Gartner did not cover. And the first one you think is simple, about travel and visas. But in the end it became really important because part of success with clients, I believe, is having the clients come visit their teams and share the vision and work with them often. And from a US perspective, or even European clients, we don't have time to plan often for visas. We have small windows of time, we just have to go. So not having a visa requirement for parts of Eastern Europe was incredibly important in the end as we made the decision. And also time zone. You know, I had to launch these centers and I didn't want to never sleep again. So being somewhat time zone effective was important. You know, India is tough. If you live in the western part of the US, there's no good time for a phone call with India. So that was actually important for me. I wanted to sleep once in a while. You can see the other ones. The other one actually is market. So when you pick a place to go for building an R&D center, your sales team often cares. And they'll say, well, if you open up that market for R&D, we can sell more software in that marketplace. I'll tell you a story in a second about how that was important for me in my decision process. So that was my criteria. So in the end, I had 4 areas I got down to, which were Eastern Europe, Asia, South America, or even the US. So in the US, there are low-cost locations in the US. There is Michigan, Minnesota, Tennessee, that the state supports discounts and tax benefits for companies to do outsourcing in the US. In fact, I began the process looking at both R&D outsourcing, or engineer outsourcing, and customer support partnership. In the end, I actually chose to partner with a company in Tennessee for customer support, onshore, because it was cost effective. So your clients are thinking about low cost onshore because there are great tax incentives in parts of the US to be onshore. So what did I do? So here are the 4 countries that I came down to based on my criteria. I think everyone on the screen knows, I think, these 4 countries. Obviously Ukraine, everyone here, also knows the Ukraine country. China became an important country. Russia, back then was in the criteria. Today, probably not, but that was 5 years ago. And Argentina. You're right. It's the wrong map of Ukraine. Wow.
That's the right.
I apologize for that.
So including Kuban
It got bigger today.
Oh well.
Wow.
Krasnodar is not.
Ukraine's much bigger today. Thank you for that. Looking at those 4 countries, and I actually went through a process, which is, you can't see this slide, but I actually took all the criteria from Gartner and my own criteria, and I weighted each of them, and I applied weightings to actually show the executive team, here's my logic of what country won kind of the bet. And Ukraine came out ahead for many reasons. I mean, we all know the great reasons why Ukraine is so great for this kind of work. But I actually had to prove my logic. And I think our clients, even if they're small clients looking for a smaller company to work with, they apply logic also to prove whoever their boss is, here's the logic I went through. This is either a career making or a career limiting activity. So I'm sure all of your customers are doing a similar model, maybe not as sophisticated, but they're doing a similar approach. And you got these slides later, so you have to write all this stuff down. I'll do it here. Well, so why did Ukraine win? So again, great talent. We went and I visited a few cities, multiple companies, met with engineers. In fact, I made the people I work with very nervous because I asked them, can I meet with your engineers? I have with me an architect who want to do interviews. But I said, you know what? I don't want to meet with engineers you plan for me to go meet. What I want to do is I want to walk around and pick people to go talk to. Because I didn't want to have them give me the best people who had the best English skills. I wanted to say, I want to talk to that person. And the companies hated that idea, let me tell you. But in the end, it was great, because everyone we talked to was technically incredible based on their level. And the more senior they were, the better English they had, and it was a great experience. But the vendors did not like me after that day. But it actually worked out great. Now, China almost won. Again, it's not Ukraine today, maybe Ukraine in the future, but not Ukraine today. So think of why China almost won, which actually happened. So I was in the final meeting. This is a 4-month process. Again, small companies would go faster, but I'm sure they go through a similar process. The head of sales said, wait a minute. If you put this center in China, I guarantee you I'll sell more software. So the CEO said, ooh, wait a minute. I can increase sales? So it almost sidelined, all my criteria almost went away, and China almost won. But thankfully, the IP attorney was in the room, and she stood up and said, no. I will not allow us to build these kind of products in China. No. Ukraine's fine. China, not going to happen. So thankfully, she was in the room, or I would be sitting in China right now talking in Chinese, not speaking in English with bad Ukrainian flags. So then I also have to validate my decision, because there are risks to come to Ukraine, as we all know. So I did 2 things. The first was I needed references, which is the most important thing to have. So I do recommend you have references for your clients that they can call, and I actually called the references. And even though the companies gave me references, some gave me a lot of insight that was not fully positive. That's going to happen, but that's okay, because most of it was positive. And in the meeting with the board of directors, I had a slide of the references. The CEO actually texted the CEO of a company I had on the screen, who was a friend of his, and asked him about his experience. And thankfully, he gave a great reference. But that actually, it was an amazing experience, actually worked out well. I also hired a company called Stratfor. Anyone hear of a company called Stratfor? Great, so what they do is they do global risk assessments around the world. And actually, I hired them to give me a report on the risks of Ukraine. This is their risk assessment back in 2010. Again, we all know if we did it again today, it would look much different. But I hired them for this reason, to look at risks. And I applied those risks on the criteria, should I do a captive or go with a partner? So first I chose the country. I chose Ukraine. And now I think about what model do I want to go do? Do I want to go alone or I want to go with a partner? And the Stratfor criteria gave me the input to say, let's use a partner model instead, because I can put in the contract ways to mitigate all the risks of coming to Ukraine or another Eastern European country that I could not do alone as a client. So we convinced the board to come with a partner model to Ukraine, but the criteria really helped, because it's actually financially might be even beneficial to do it alone sometimes in some European countries, but you can mitigate a lot of risk for your clients if you outline for them how working with you can mitigate their risks. So we chose to go with a few partners in Ukraine. And here's what I learned along the way. My advice to you when you look at your clients or your prospects. The first is assume that they're smart. So clients do a lot of research today on the web. They talk to their friends. They probably know more than you know about the laws, the market, the costs, the talent. So assume they're smart and assume they understand what's going on. You can always train them if they don't know, but most clients I'm talking to today, they do a lot of research and what's happening in the country. So first I would say assume people are smart. Some vendors did not assume that I was smart. And obviously they didn't get any work. The ones that knew and trusted me that I knew as much as they knew, when we worked together on the strategy, they got the work. So again, even a small company, you need to approach them and say, I believe you know what you're doing, let's work together. The second is references. Again, people are going to use them, they're going to call them. You have to have references to land a client of any size today. And the third is mutual goals. So the best partners I had understood my goals, and they weren't just I wanted to staff a few great people. I had bigger goals, I had growth goals, I had risks. They knew my risks. They helped me work on how to mitigate those risks and gave me the details I needed and confidence I needed to come to Ukraine. So you really need to understand why your clients want to outsource, why they want to work with you, and help them along on that journey. And the final thing I learned is, which is the most important lesson I learned this whole 5-year journey as a client is, the most important thing is starting on the right foot. So I managed, I would say, 10 or 12 teams that outsourced in Ukraine, not alone around the world. And each team started differently. So some started and said, I want to hear from you and the vendor, what is the best approach to start? How do you do hiring? How do you work together? I'm open to hearing and leveraging best practices. And those teams, in the end, had incredible success. Low attrition, developed great products, but the teams that said, no, I know better, or weren't open to listening how to approach at the first day, never recovered. I could never get them 6 months later to change their strategy, to change how they want to interview every person 5 times. Once you start, it's hard to bring it back. So one lesson I did learn, which we're trying to do now, is make sure you set up front with your clients the right expectations, and it's critical to start off well with your clients. We all know that, but on the client side, and I was in the client's shoes, and I was trying to teach my teams to start off well, and many of them just didn't listen, and we had problems. So the question is, how did the story end? The story ended about 1.5 years ago when I left BMC, and we actually achieved our goal of a few hundred engineers working in Ukraine. Now the path didn't go as expected. I thought the path would go as that chart showed, but in reality, BMC acquires lots of companies, and we acquired in those 5 years, I would say 5 or 6 companies, and more than half had teams in Ukraine at a variety of vendors. So we actually grew through both organic growth with a few partners and by acquiring companies. But again, in the end, we have a few hundred people in Ukraine as of 2 years ago. Now it's a little different, but when I left, it was a few hundred. Doing the strategic work, so a lot of things I showed you earlier are being built in Ukraine, and the client's really happy. So the story actually was a great story, but hopefully you can take some lessons on what size company you are. The criteria is really important. And I would in fact share criteria with your prospects of here's how you should look at picking a country and picking a vendor and the risks you can mitigate from working with us. No matter the size of the client, they'd appreciate that material to help them sell their boss on what to go do. Because everyone does that at the client side. They got to convince somebody who has the budget, you give them the budget to work with one of us. So that's all the content I had. Let me answer your questions. Any question about what I presented? Or it could be a client. You can ask me any client questions about what clients could be thinking about Ukraine today or about Eastern Europe. So let me open up to the team here for any questions. Yes?
What provider did you actually choose to start with?
So we chose two. We chose Global Logic in Kyiv and SoftServe in Lviv. So I chose a dual strategy to mitigate my risks, having only one vendor for this size of a project.
How was your experience with both of them?
So they're both equally great, actually. Different, but equally good. I would say initially I liked Kyiv personally better, but now I like Lviv better. But I go to both. We had great experiences. I think the good thing is the talent was equal. People, Ukrainian engineers, as we all know, are fantastic. Differences in company structure and philosophy and strategies, which we learned to leverage, but both are great. Now, I joined SoftServe in the end, but both are great. Question?
Was it an option to create a new company in Ukraine, not right?
So the question is could we have created a captive in Ukraine? Is that your question? And not outsource?
Yes. Was it an option to create a new company?
Yeah, so the issue is, for at least BMC, that's why there aren't that many ISVs with captives in Ukraine today, because the tax laws are not mature enough yet to enable Western companies to have captives in Ukraine. You need very mature laws that are stable to enable a public company to have a captive here. That's the most important thing that does not exist today.
So I'm from U.S. company which has office in Ukraine.
Yes.
In Cyprus and it's not has their office, and also I know like 5 or 6 other companies which have offices in Ukraine.
So there are some, but there aren't that many, and those who are here, I think, have a higher risk profile than my company did, because the risk, looked at the risks, and the benefits of working with a partner outweighed the risks. Now, we also, every 6 months, I looked at the laws of Ukraine, the tax laws, the inflation, the financial risk, and we're making a decision. Should we now make a captive or stay with partners? So we constantly were keeping an eye on new laws coming out and the risks. But for us, it was too risky to do a captive. For most Western companies, you see many more captives in Eastern Europe. If you go to Poland, or Republic, or Bulgaria, or Romania, you see lots of software companies, all of those countries. You don't see them here in Ukraine yet because the laws are not fully mature, in my opinion. And why they're not here yet.
What are the key laws? What are the key laws missing that you would like to see on the books? And in general, do you see the trend improving or getting worse? Are you thinking of pulling out, or you are encouraging you to stay?
Yeah, so the key laws for me were first the tax laws. Some of the corruption laws or the legal were still a little bit vague around the CFO and CEO being personally liable. In the U.S., there's LLCs that there's less liability issues. Correct. So there's more challenges in Ukraine today than in the West, and it was getting better. So and I showed you the Stratford chart, we saw many of those areas were improving. So our thinking was by now laws would be mature enough to have a captive in Ukraine. For the last year and a half, the other risks overweighed those risks. So now In fact, if today, if I were the same decision, I would probably be standing in Poland or somewhere. Because the risks are still a little too high for a mature company to pick this kind of project in Ukraine. Now, maybe a year from now, but still today it's still a little risky. So the risk profile changed a bit. Now there's more financial risk. You know, the risk of the hryvnia deflation is a huge problem, I think, for some Western companies who might want to make a bet on a captive. More questions? So.
As a client, would you ever consider product development services instead of just hiring resources? Okay.
So I'm not sure your question. So we hired people, but they drove full product lines.
I mean, transferring responsibility to the vendor for a result.
So we did that. So for different projects, we used different models. So some projects we deployed for the vendor, had the product manager on their team, and they drove the results and the roadmap. Other projects were part of the team. So the key is we actually use the teams as part of our team. We never said, you are the vendor, we're the client. It was, we're now one big team together. Let's work together. Let's go to release planning together. Let's visit each other. It was never this, it was very collaborative, but we had levels of collaboration, including product ownership. Yes.
A couple years ago, you developed an executive kind of for BMC local strategy for Ukraine. What do you think? Is it Ukraine developing in Ukraine? Is it still low cost or not?
Yeah, so I wouldn't use the word low cost. So India is low cost. Ukraine is the right cost for the right expectations. So it can't be equal to on-site US. There has to be some cost benefit to having that risk of going somewhere else, even for great talent. But we were willing to pay more for great talent. There's supposed to be a delta between onshore and offshore, but I was not looking to repeat India again. I would have gone somewhere like India. I chose to go to Eastern Europe and pay twice as much, almost, for better results. Are we almost out of time?
One question left.
One more question. I'll try to do two, but we'll go fast. I'll go. Yes, you go first.
All right. Did you do any calculation of value per dollar for different vendors or point cost? How do you quantify the value you're getting from the partners?
So we didn't, so I knew the cost per partner around the world. So I was tracking the cost per role by partner by country. So I knew the cost of all our engineering teams. I also tracked attrition rates. I tracked hiring times. We tracked somewhat productivity, but it's hard to track productivity. We kind of got a sense of who was more productive than others. Now, we didn't use a hard calculation of taking all those factors and getting some score, but we did use those criteria. We made decisions to either grow a vendor or shrink a vendor. I compared them all together in many ways. But again, I didn't do a hard numerical score or some numbers and some feeling of which vendors did better. And last question.
Did you use any kind of added value services? If you did, what kind of added value services did you use?
So the question is value-added service.
Yeah.
So again, my approach was we used our partners for their full potential like we use our internal resources. So of course we used architects and product managers, but we also knew that for new products, we often didn't have the best talent in the world in-house. We couldn't afford to have them. So as we wanted to launch a big data project around Hadoop, but we had no skills internally of how to do that. So actually we went to our partners and said, can you help us design our new big data solution? And we leveraged partners to go design and build that, as an example. But we always approached our partners with our hardest problems and said, can you help here? And often they said yes. In fact, we launched called an incubator, which is, think of new ideas to innovate around our products. And we launched an incubator in India and Ukraine, even to brainstorm crazy ideas. And a lot of those ideas became part of that video. So is that a value-added service? I would say yes. Is it defined? No, but it was, you're very innovative as a culture. Let's leverage your innovation and your great technical skills.
Okay, let's thank you to Brian.
Thanks a lot.